So as already mentioned, the topic of my project, the component of my project is about the water relations in the lodgepole pine in an early Mountain Pine Beetle simulator attack. And surprisingly enough, this has been an area of priority research highlighted for a lot of people about the need to understand or to partition the components of the water balance in the forests affected by Mountain Pine Beetle. And what do I mean by that? Well, we don't really have an understanding, and people is very aware of this a while ago, about the effects in the microclimate or the capacity of the forest to store water as interception in different components like the canopy in the forest floor, trunks or branches, and, or the particular effects in, or changes in transpiration processes in the forest, and how will these changes will reflect in terms of the soil moisture dynamics, right? And just a quick note, I was just doing a review, a literature review 2 weeks ago about these components, and people still highlight the publication from this year about the key research priorities about the need to understand these components to clearly forecast with accuracy the effects of the Mountain Pine Beetle, not only in the water balance, but also in other key ecosystem processes like respiration or nutrient dynamics. So what kind of environments are we talking about in terms of in the Upper Foothills? And this is just a time series of two main components that I think summarize pretty nice. The Upper Foothills. So we have the winter here as periods of frozen soil, and the summer, right? So pretty much these kind of systems are summarized in terms of winter and summer. And the winter period, here in green I'm showing the soil moisture trend, and in the blue in here I'm showing the rain, or in terms of the precipitation, which might be raining here in the summer and snowfall in here. And the only message in here is about, okay, the winter is fairly long in these kind of systems, and the latter parts of winter have a critical component in terms of the soil moisture recharge, right? So you can see the fading trend in the soil, and by the end by the spring melt, you have a fairly important contribution of the winter or the spring melt in the soil moisture, which is very important for the ecosystem processes in terms of water available, right? So these kind of systems are known as winter-dominated systems. As spring melt dominated systems. Now, as Aldous mentioned, the microclimate, it's a very important component to understand, but we didn't really see big changes. And why? Well, because the structure of the canopy openness didn't show a significant change. Right? We do have, of course, we do have a change in terms of light coming from radiation, from reflected radiation from the change in the canopy from green to red. However, because we were measuring in the forest, in set towers, we didn't have the resolution to actually capture the specific change in the frequency, in the reflectance of red needles. Right? This was just a measure of the microclimate at the forest scale basis. So we didn't have a change. However, we did use these components for our analysis as well. So what is the story up front that I'm going to tell you guys? First of all, well, as I mentioned already, we didn't see a change in the canopy structure. So we didn't see a change in the capacity of the forest to store water. We didn't see a change, of course, in the water reaching the forest floor as net precipitation as well. But what we did see, of course, was a decrease in the transpiration from the trees because we killed them, right? So that worked. So we had a decrease in transpiration, and again, because the change in the water going and reaching the forest floor didn't change. Well, there was no change in terms of forest floor interception capacity. So what can we see? What are the changes that we can summarize for the Mountain Pine Beetle early red attack? Well, first of all, a decrease in transpiration by killing the tree will be reflected as an increase in soil moisture. So this is the main take-home message of my talk. The early red attack effects in the water balance is going to be a translation of the reduction in transpiration and an increase in soil moisture, but not a change in the capacity of rainfall interception from the forest. So what do I mean by canopy, by forest interception? Well, we wanted to understand the movement of water through the forest, in terms of the water being stored in the canopy when it rains, and then the water flowing through the canopy and reaching the forest floor, and then subsequently lost as forest floor interception, and remaining water flowing and reaching the mineral soil as recharged into the mineral soil. To do so, we needed to understand the microclimatic conditions in the forest. So we had measurements of light as net radiation and quantum sensors or power in the forest floor. We also measure, we measure the microclimatic context in both the canopy height and the understory, in terms of light, wind, temperature and relative humidity in both, again, canopy and understory. In terms of rain, we measure precipitation using a universal rain gauge that allows you to get measurements of rain and snowfall. And we also measure, we had a cluster of tipping buckets measuring precipitation rainfall on an event basis to measure the amount of water flowing through the forest, through the canopy. We measure the water flowing through the trunks of the trees. I actually measure this as a stem flow, and we measure the water flowing through the canopy as through flow. To understand the forest floor, and this is a fairly important component because, ironically, this has been one of the components this is studied in the water dynamics. And most of the time, people neglect the effects of the forest floor interception, and we actually realize that it's fairly important. So we characterize the seasonal water dynamic, water content in the forest floor, also the water holding capacity, what's the maximum water that the forest floor can hold, and what are the drainage dynamics of this forest floor as recharged into the mineral soil. So we measure these three components in the forest floor as well. And what we come up basically is that the canopy interception and the forest interception as components of the forest interception capacity can add up all the way up to 70% of the total rain reaching the forest. And the main component in the interception of the forest is the canopy. However, the forest floor interception capacity was fairly large. And again, I told you before that the forest floor is typically a neglected component. And as you can see here, it's very important to consider this, particularly when we think red to gray attack, we will have a loss of canopy, or an increase in canopy. Well, this water is going to reach the forest floor as well. So you will have an increase in this component given subsequent stages of the Mountain Pine Beetle attack in the forest. So this means that we had 30% of water actually reaching the forest floor, the mineral soil in growing season. Now, about the transpiration component, we wanted to understand the transpiration changes not only in terms of the forest, but also from the individual trees, and then how can we scale from transpiration from individuals to the trees to the stand scale. And to do so, we had two basic questions. And I think it relates to the question about the efficacy of the treatments, because there is not a lot of research about how does a tree die, right? So our first question is like, what is physiologically, what is the behavior of a tree that is dying? What are the fading rates in terms of transpiration of these trees? And the other question was more about whether if there is a differential response from healthy trees in a partially attacked forest. It's like, presumably, if we have an increase in the soil moisture or the soil water available in the forest, can these trees actually compensate for this water available? So again, this is how the system looked like in terms of the experimental design and where I actually did my study. So we have, this picture is a classified image. So what I just classified was red, peak presence of red crowns in the area, so just how the treatments look like in terms of just red crowns, not in terms of dying or treated trees. So how we analyze the transpiration, we use the thermal dissipation technique. And here I'm showing just a snapshot of one series. The colors are not friendly, sorry about that. But so what this graph shows is just the seasonal transpiration of 1 year in terms of millimeters per day. Let me just walk you through this graph. So the first thing that I want to show you guys is that we have 3 different tree conditions in here. So the first one is the control, the neutral control in blue, which is in the middle. The second one is the massive attack ones, which are trees that are fading or dying at the bottom. And the third one is the happy hyper green, which is at the top. And as you can see, all of the 3 tree conditions are following the same bell-like shape, which is a seasonal shape. And it has a peak by the latter part of July and beginning of August, which is the peak of the transpiration or the evaporative demand, and also the peak of the growing season. So what this graph shows is that despite the treatment effect, which is fairly clear, you have a decrease in trees that are dying in terms of transpiration and increase of trees that are compensating. We have a gradient treatment, but also all of the trees are coupled still with the atmospheric drivers, which means that all of the treatments are still having a seasonal effect and they are responding to their environmental drivers, right? So what we can see is the fading trees are still physiologically active and still coupled with the atmospheric drivers. And the same thing with the compensatory response, which is the green. The compensatory response against are healthy trees in this partial attack stage. Now, if we understand that this response is significant, if we want to scale transpiration from an individual to the forest or to the stand scale, we need to address the different tree status or the tree conditions that we have in the forest. So we just decided to play with the proportion in different scenarios of live trees or healthy trees that are compensating in a gradient. So for example, we say, what if we have in a forest 75% of healthy trees transpiring more, as A, and B only 50, and C 25%, and the remaining percentage will include trees that are still physiologically active, but transpire less, and trees that are dead, right? So as you can see, the relationship is not linear, and you can't, like, typically, this exercise was done because typically people assume that the forest, once it's attacked, it's only a pool of live and dead trees, and live are just trees that are transpiring normal, right? But as you can see, you really have to understand what is the composition of your forest in terms of this proportion, and you will have a different response of the transpiration, where 75% of trees that are healthy, you will have actually an increase. This is just a hypothetical scenario, but you will have an increase in transpiration of 6%. And by having 0.5% of your trees affected, you will have only 14% of decrease of transpiration from control conditions, meaning that only 86% of control conditions transpiration. So this is just a message of, like, you need to understand the proportion of healthy and dying trees in your forest if you want to understand the effect of transpiration, which also has an effect of below ground conditions, as you will see in the short. Now, so just to wrap up this part, what we can see is that from green to red attack, we had little to no effect in interception, because we had still the needles present. Total 70% of all the rain was lost as interception, and this interception means canopy and forest floor, and that means that most of the rainfall events in the summer are being captured in the forest, and only large or intense storms are going to be able to reach the mineral soil. What we can see is that interception most likely will decline once the needles are shed, but we still need to understand the effects of the forest floor, or the resilient effect of the forest floor in this kind of system. Regarding transpiration, what we can see is that healthy trees in a partial attack zone can increase the water use. So we can name this as the compensatory response, compensated for dying trees. And the changes, this is on an individual basis, but the changes in the forest on a partial attack zone could be minimal, right? So that's why you need to understand.
Pablo, quick question. Can you explain why do healthy trees that are surrounded by sick trees use more water?
Well, because the effect of the mountain pine beetle is well, the trees are dying or dead, so they're using less water. And then there is more water available in the forest, so they can use that water. And also lies other evidence of this kind of system as being water limited. And so they can take advantage of this more water available and increase their stomach conductance.
So it's you use the word compensatory response, but you could also see it as it's an opportunistic response. If
exactly.
More resources available and they're taking advantage of it.
Yep.
Is a lodgepole pine considered a thrifty water species, or?
It has a very wide range of stomata control. So this is an evidence of why these places are water limited or snow dominated, right? Because there is experiment, I think Janice Cook's experiments of drought from last week are very nice tied with these findings, and other people that the lodgepole pine has a very dramatic capacity of regulate their stomata opening, and because we had the control and the partial attacks done with more water under the same environmental conditions, the ones with more water were able to transpire more to increase their stomata conductance, which means more transpiration.
If they're transpiring more, would you assume or would you project that the nutrient status of these live trees would be better?
The nutrient status? Yeah, that's presumably because of the water, like I mean, they will have more like capacity. There will be more.
Because what you have is more site resources available to the live trees.
Yeah, but also the nutrient thing is tricky because the nutrient flush, the main input is in the spring melt, right? So there is like a temporal uncoupling.
Well, and we'll talk about
and we'll talk more about it.
here, right?
Depends on the concentration of nutrients. It's
Yeah.
You're taking up more water, so if the concentration of nutrients in the water is the same, they also get more nutrients. But if the increase in water just dilutes the nutrient pool, then they end up with net zero difference in terms of the nutrients that they take up. So it depends on the nutrient concentration. It's probably going to be underwater in the soil.
Janice, and then Axel.
So you mentioned that the light interception of Canopy, whether it's control or partial kill or more kill, the light interception was the same in terms of the quantity of light. But you didn't mention anything about the quality of that light interception. So we know that a green canopy is going to absorb more of that red light.
Yeah.
So change that far red ratio, which is pretty important to understory plant responses. Have you thought about maybe tacking that onto your summer to see whether you are changing that red far red ratio?
Yeah, we had, for light of the understory, we had quantum sensors measuring power. However, we don't have the resolution, I think, to capture particular. Of course, we saw a change in the crown, in the fluorescence. Right? We had the rate stages, but overall, because we were not, I think people from Inertial Atmospheric Sciences and Janus Biceps Lab have done that, particularly getting the crowns and getting the light properties in the needles. But by mounting the sensors in the forest, like that we did, like we put 4 sensors on each of the stands, we didn't see a change in the light overall. But I'm thinking because of the resolution of our instrumentation, right? So that's just the thing. Look, on an overall stand basis, we couldn't capture a change in the quality of power of the
But it will change.
It would change, yeah. Once we understand these above ground components, so above ground components refer to like evaporative demand and interception. Now, this one component was one of my fears because I need to be able to explain whatever was like always what was happening above ground in the soil or in the below ground component. In terms of, do we see a clear response in the soil moisture after these mountain pine beetle attack effects seen in the transpiration particularly? So we wanted to explore or to explain our treatment effects in 3 different soil depths and also to understand the spatial, whether if there's a spatial pattern in these treatment effects, trying to understand the effects of the trees in the soil. So this is a rather complicated graph, so let me explain. This illustrates the logic of what Oldest was explaining in terms of before-after treatment approach, BACI. So I want to walk you through this graph. So this graph summarizes the three depths that we wanted to analyze in terms of rows. So the first row represents the 20 centimeter layer of the soil, the middle one the 40 centimeter, and the bottom one the 60 centimeter depth. So now the treatments are organized in columns. I'm sorry, but they are not organized in a logical way. So the left one, the first one represents the 100% kill treatment. The middle one represents the 50% or the partially attack stand, and the right one represents the clear cut. So this means that in the y-axis we're going to have this component of the treatment, and in the x-axis we're going to have the control conditions. Now we also have the before-after. Okay, so the before represents before we applied any treatments in black, and the after once we apply the treatments in red. So again, what is the logic of this? Okay, so let's see. Each of these points represent the mean of spatially distributed moisture in the stand. In the control was 0.25 for 1 day, and in that day, exact same day, in the treatment 100% killing here was 0.22, for example. And so we build this relationship, and what you want or what you aim is to have a fairly tight relationship before you apply the treatments, and once you apply the treatments, you have a shift in the relationships. So as you can see for these three depths, we can trace parallel lines, and we didn't detect a significant effect. So you can think that before and after, in terms of red and black, have no different pattern, right? The only pattern that you can see, and that's what's fairly unfortunate or rather exciting, is that all the red is in the right top side, which means basically that not only you had an increase in the water content in your treatment site, but in your control sites as well, right? So this complicates the thing, and what this means is that we had a fairly strong effect in terms of interannual variability, meaning that before we applied the treatments, it was a fairly dry year, and once we applied the treatments, we had a fairly wet year's conditions, right? So now, if you get back to the top layer, we can see that there is a treatment effect. You can see definitely that something is going on at the top, right? In the red, you had an increase in the control conditions, but you had a way more increase, a larger increase in the treatment as well. But this interannual variability is pulling the relationships as well. So we were not able to detect or to say whether if there was a change in terms of being wetter or not, or we were able to also to detect the effects of the trees transpiring and also modifying the relationships. So in order to detect or to clean out this noise, we applied we modeled these relationships counting for the interannual variability, and you can see that the relationships are the same. You can see for the bottom layers you have the same, again, the relationships after the treatments in the right top side, which is wetter. However, in the top part, in the 20 centimeter layer, you can see a clear treatment effect in terms just of the sides being wetter, right? And the clear cut has actually an effect as well in the 40 centimeter layer, which makes sense. What is interesting is that the treatment is subtle. It's not a dramatic increase, and even in the clear cut side, you had a shift in the after relations in terms of being wetter, but it's not as clear. Well, it's not as clear, it's not as pronounced as we would expect, right? But it is clear that we do have an effect in this component, in this layer. So what we decided to do was to conduct an intensive spatial analysis only for the first 5 centimeter layer of the soil. So we had every 10 meter points, and we measured soil moisture throughout the year. So we had on a weekly basis. So this is the time series of those. So each point represents the mean of that. So we have the control in green as a reference and the clear cut in yellow as another reference. So we have the control and the yellow in the extremes all the time, right? What is interesting to notice is that the spread in the data from the other components in terms of partial attack stand or 50% kill in pale triangle and in 100% or massive attack in red, the spread will change depending on the time of the year, which is quite interesting that you can see a different effect or a non-linear, or the effect of the treatment will depend on what will have a strong seasonal component, where the main effect, where we saw a significancy from spread in all the treatments was, not surprisingly, in the peak of the growing season, which is when the trees are transpiring the most, right? So we did an analysis in space of this, each of these times or dates. And I'm going to show you the interpolation exercise in a series. So this shows the soil moisture where deep blue means wetter and light blue means dry, right? So by May, what we can say is that the control is the driest side, fairly homogeneous, and the wettest side is the clear cut, where you have in the middle the massive attack site, or the 100% kill site, fairly wetter than the control, as well as the partial attack, or the 50% side. But it's worth to mention that, surprisingly, the partial attack stand is showing fairly pronounced spatial variability and kind of the same on the clear-cut side, which was surprising, but might be an artifact of the beginning of the growing season. By the time you hit June, the same thing you see. The site, the control is the driest site, the clear-cut is the other extreme, the wetter, still fairly spatial variable, which makes sense because you have pockets of micro site conditions. The massive attack is fairly wet, and the partial attack stand is drier than the massive attack, but it's still showing this pronounced spatial variability. July is fairly consistent, the same behavior. So you can see that the partial attack stand is showing the same spatial variability. So by the time you hit August, you can see that consistently a partial attack stand is being reflecting the influence of the tree conditions of this kind of sites. What do we have in here? Well, we have trees that are compensating, trees that are dying, and trees that are dead, right? So you have a fairly range of extreme conditions in terms of tree status that is being reflected in this first 5 centimeter layer in the soil, which I think is fairly exciting to have this footprint as well, right? So what can we see in terms of what can we wrap up for the soil? Well, the effects of our treatments, the Mountain Pine Beetle early red attack phases, were fairly well reflected in the 20 centimeter layer of the soil profile. You had an increase in soil moisture, and it was great. It followed a logical stage where the massive attack was wetter. Of course, the clear cut was wetter, but in terms of the Mountain Pine Beetle, the massive attack was wetter, and then the partial attack stemmed. But it was very surprising, well, not surprising, but exciting to see that the change in spatial variability was significant for the partial attack stand, where it was reflecting the presence of live, dying, and dead trees as well. I don't know if, shall I keep going or? Okay, so now, change of gears. Now we can understand, we have these relationships, we've seen these relationships on an experimental basis. So now, we can scale these results to the Alberta's pine zone. We've seen this map several times in last week. This is the home range of the Mountain Pine Beetle. And these dots represent the presence of rain data, of precipitation data on a daily basis of more than 32 years records. Okay? So this exercise allowed us to explore the range of responses with our relationships with true data, or data seen in the province, where we have the lodgepole pine forest. So we decided to explore the hydroclimatic conditions with this Mountain Pine Beetle scenarios seen. So we have 4 scenarios simulated. We have the control conditions, where we have live trees. We have the green attack, where we have this mix of live and fading and dead trees. The red attack, where we only have fading and dead trees, and the gray attack we will only see dead trees. So this is the basic framework of what I'm going to talk about. We have the water balance is going to be BL, and is going to be equal to precipitation in terms of rainfall minus evapotranspiration, meaning ET, right? So this is the data set. So we have 54 climate stations with 32 years daily climatic data. And this is just going to show you, interestingly enough, the past 13 years of records are showing a pronounced drying trend in terms of total rainfall. And Ted Hogg has been done research in here in terms of total precipitation and the effects of dieback, given this dry trend that we've seen in Alberta over these past 13 years. So you can see that most of the time, 70% of these years have been below the long-term median in this lodgepole pine home range, all the data available for the lodgepole pine home range. Now, so what I'm going to show you is just to explore this relationship spatial-wise with the average long-term rainfall, which is 274 millimeters, and the deep blue areas show a range of about 300 millimeters, and dry zone areas showing about 100 to 200 millimeters of rain. So our average water balance was 23 millimeters, which means that these sites are fairly dry overall through the province. And so deep blue means about 30 millimeters and dry, and the red points are actually showing not zero, but negative numbers, which means that these systems theoretically are going to be under deficit, or they will be losing more water than they will get in terms of rain. Again, these relationships are only in terms of rainfall, but not snowfall.
So it's just growing season.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So if we raise the question, how do we want to tackle this? Okay, what is the probability to exceed these long-term means in terms of what is the probability to be wetter than 23 millimeters given the Mountain Pine Beetle scenario? So again, this is the control conditions, and you can see that you will have a wide variety of conditions, and the mean spatial-wise, again, the mean that I showed you before as 23 millimeters is an arithmetic mean with the rain gauges. So if we do the interpolation exercise, the mean will have a decrease. We'll have a minus 4 millimeters, and it will represent 83% less wetter than the long-term mean, right? But this doesn't really matter. This was just an exercise, the offset between doing an exercise spatial-wise or an exercise just with the numbers, arithmetically-wise. So now, what this is exciting, what we see with the green attack, is that we have an increase of 39% of the long-term mean in control conditions, where instead of having a 23 mean, we will have a 32 mean. So you have an increase of 9 millimeters in the green attack, which is actually not significant, right? With the green attack. But remember, the green attack is representing compensatory trees and something else that I will explain to you in a second. Well, we see once we have the scenarios of red attack and gray attack, we can see that most of the province is going to be wetter, way wetter than the long-term mean of your system, meaning that 209 more probability to be wetter for a red attack, and a gray attack will have like 500, which is completely, it's just going out of the bounds of what you're simulating. What you can see in here is it's going to be way, way wetter, pretty much.
And Pablo, so this represents the assumption that lodgepole pine is everywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
That it's all lodgepole pine.
Yeah, exactly. Now, in terms of the time series, which is interesting too, you can see, so from 1979 all the way to 2010, this is the exercise of the means through the province, through the home range of the lodgepole pine. And you can see, okay, control green, pale orange, green attack, red attack red, and gray, red attack gray. And so you can see, as I mentioned already, spatial-wise, there was not a clear pronounced effect between control and green attack. And as you can see here in the time series, you're seeing the same thing. What is interesting is, again, the dry trend that I was telling you before with the rain, where the negative component of the water balance is completely concentrated in this portion of the data set, meaning that we are in a dry trend, and this dry trend is being reflected in terms of water deficit for this forest, right? And the difference, not having a difference between control and green attack is not only a matter of having compensatory trees, but also a matter of the forest floor compensating for the canopy, right? So I'm not showing in detail the components of the model, we can talk about this later, but as I mentioned earlier, the forest floor has a critical potential to compensate for the loss of the canopy, right? And this exercise shows that the role of the forest floor as intercepting water in this was even higher than the canopy loss, okay? Now, once we overcome this threshold in terms of increasing the canopy openness and not having compensatory effects, so you can see the red attack and the gray attack is way up, right? However, interestingly enough, you can see that given the dry trend, so these represent the zero, right, that I didn't explain, sorry about that, but everything below this line means that your forest is under deficit conditions, and this line represents the long-term trend, right? So, as you can see that ironically, the long-term trend is being way, it seems that a red attack simulated is going to bring the forest in its long-term water balance condition, right? So you can see the long-term trend, you can see this part, the green attack, the control and the green attack, you have the long-term line over here, and once you reach the dry trend, you will see that the relationships are down, right? You actually have the forest under deficit conditions, right? So you can see the red attack was way up, and once you reach this dry trend, these conditions are starting to show similar behavior as the long-term trend of the water balance, which confounds a lot. I think the message in here is that it's a confounding. We are under a climatic, this dry trend is confounding the effects in a way, or complicating the analysis of the water balance of the lodgepole pine forest. Anyway, so what we can see to wrap up take-home messages in here, the water balance in the lodgepole pine forest was close to zero, meaning that precipitation was almost equal to evapotranspiration losses. And we are in this recent dry trend where we have a lower rain. These have been translated in an increase in the water deficit years where we have more ET or more water loss than rain coming in the system. Rain, not snow. There was no significant change in between green and Mountain Pine Beetle attack, and there was a fairly large change once we had a red attack and a gray attack. So I would like to acknowledge the people. This work wouldn't be able to be completed without the help of my peers in the Forest Pathology Lab and the people in the project, Pete and Anne, technicians such as Emily, Samantha, and Hallie, and of course the help of Aldous and Ellen. Thanks.